Event. Our first presentation this morning will be by Kathryn A. Burnett. She is Senior Lecturer at the University of the West of Scotland, which I am given to understand is still part of the United Kingdom.
For now.
For now. Well, I don't know about the West of Scotland. We'll find out about that. She holds a PhD from Glasgow Caledonian University, and her talk today is called Every Force Evolves a Form, the Mediatization of Scotland's Bardic Tradition, with reference to Sorley MacLean and Hemachandra. Please welcome Kathryn A. Burnett.
I don't know if you can hear me okay. Okay, first of all, I just want to say thanks very much to everybody for coming in to hear myself, as well as everyone else who's going to deliver this morning, and the rest of the day is going to be really great. I have been to Sydney before, a couple of years ago. Heather Sparling, which I remember if you know, who was at the Smiling Studies colleagues, and Linda here is also was at that event, and it was a really exciting event, and we got to meet some folk from people who were working on research here, and that was lovely. As you can see from here, my, and as Todd said, my own patch, if you like, is Scotland, and I'm based at the University of the West of Scotland. But what I wanted to particularly talk a little bit about, and I'll do this in a minute on one of the slides, is the Scottish Centre for Island Studies, which is a very small outfit. It's quite a virtual thing in many respects. But what I wanted to just flag up right from the start is that my own background is actually anthropology, to some extent sociology, and actually what I've mainly been doing for the last number of years is working in the creative media department. And so I'm not a literature person, and I'm certainly not someone who has any expertise in music and musicology or indeed performance per se. And just not a huge amount of people here, of course, are hugely expert in that. So I just want to kind of build that in as a little bit of a caveat. And what I really wanted to do is I wanted to kind of contextualise what we do at the centre a little bit with this example of some work we've been doing with a number of events and a number of activities, but particularly, I'm sure a number of you will know the names in reference to two key figures for Scotland, both now sadly dead, but two key figures, Sorley MacLean and Hemachandra. So let me just forward on. I'm conscious of time, and I've got some clips and things, and of course I've rehearsed this in my head 40,000 times, and none of it will go to plan. So Todd's going to shout at me at a certain point and tell me to wind up. So we'll try and get some of the clips to work if we can. So just really quickly, the slide is there. There's quite a lot on this slide, so I want my apologies for that, but it's partly just also for my own reference, so I can kind of get through this stuff. But the Centre for Island Studies does a number of things, and the focus particularly is largely cultural, although the point about the cultural is that it references into socio-economic issues, for example migration, language policy, even things like currently we're looking at some work around climate change and renewable energy and so on. But a huge part of what we are involved in terms of the folk mainly grouping around the centre is largely culture. But it's also the politicisation of culture, and the sense in which culture is never neutral, and culture is something that we want to really be alive to, as something that very much operates as a political terrain. And, as was already pointed out, no more, no less in Scotland currently, but we'll come on to that. So this wonderful event and week of activities, as we know, is really about story and song, but the telling of story through song, and indeed the telling of stories in their own right. Those of you among the audience who know Sorley MacLean and Hemachandra will know that in many respects, certainly Sorley MacLean is very much a poet, and wrote prose as well, but very much defined as a poet, and not a singer. Sorley's not a singer, but I hope to show you a little bit about the contextualisation of Sorley in reference to song and music as we go through. Hemachandra is in some respects a different character, and very much is known for his songs and his own poetry, but we'll see again in a minute just how important the role of song is in terms of Hamish's profile and how that can be engaged with through an idea of wider media. So as this slide says here, the idea of telling Scotland's story is one that I want to share with you a little bit, and it's a tiny sort of fragment or scrape of what we could do there in any sense, but it's particularly important, I think, in this 2014 year that the opportunity is taken wherever to sort of revisit a little bit of our history in terms of what has been powerful and important for how Scotland has been defined culturally, and indeed how it's not been defined, what's been ignored, what's been negated, and so on. So the sense of the 2014 referendum for the independence sort of issue in Scotland, I'm sure you know, the vote went to no, but it was a relatively narrow margin of 55% for no and 45% for yes. And I don't want to talk about that in any great detail, you'll see at the bottom of the list there's a reference to the referendum, but the key thing is the sense of voice and the sense of cultural debate and a flourishing around political understandings that's worth thinking about, I think. The quote there, again, a number of you may recognise, of course, fairly sort of well-known quote, comes from Walter Benjamin, the idea of memory and, of course, the role of story. And as it says here, memory is the epic faculty par excellence. Such a simple word, memory, but so incredibly important to all of us, not least, I'm sure, at an event like this. And the record kept by memory constitutes the creative matrix of various epic forms. And how we would define what's epic or not is itself very, very interesting, and there's been not least any number of discussions and debates over the years in Scotland about what we would categorise, if you like, as the most epic aspects of our culture and heritage. So the idea of what role community bards might play, or academic research, creative practice, the idea of what role media in a wider sense, for example, both traditional media such as print media, books for example, and indeed digital media, is something that I've spent quite a lot of time looking at with both myself and with a number of colleagues. And the other key thing of the work that we've done with a number of projects in the Island Centre has been the role of archive. And here we are in a library, which is just bonus point, because archive is absolutely crucial, as we know, to kind of taking forward the idea of memory and the practice of memory. And then, as it says there, this contextualisation, this politicisation agenda of really asking some pretty important questions and continue to ask questions of where culture can be understood as a critique. What are the margins of culture? What are the complicities of culture? And Scotland itself still has quite a lot to open up to itself yet about a number of complicities around how it defines its own cultural forms and its sense of identity and so on. So let's meet, there's a couple of images there of Hamish and Hamish actually with Hugh McDermott there, Fiona McNeill, who's a very, very well-known Gaelic singer, of course, and the bottom there is actually a little image of one of the events we did from a conference, a celebration conference of Sorley MacLean, a little brochure there, but I'll move on. So just really quickly on this slide here, I did some work, particularly actually with my dad, Ray, who I do quite a lot of work with, and looking at Gaelic song. A huge amount of other people, of course, have done much more on it, much more expert on it. But I just wanted to make the point that Gaelic oral tradition is really what I want to say here. Again, I'm sure many people know this in the audience, but Gaelic oral tradition is absolutely hugely at the backdrop of this discussion around particularly Sorley MacLean and indeed for that matter Hamish. The legacy of Gaelic in terms of its oral tradition and its immense sort of depth of richness is understood in Scotland, but it's not as understood as well as it might be. And again, without going into that quote particularly, it just gives you a little flavour of some of the discussions around what song did for people in communities, which I'm sure again a number of you will be familiar with. The idea of song, as it says in that second paragraph, as a conduit for transmission and the valorisation of history and identity is really what I think is particularly important to pull out there. So this idea of what is the valorisation of identity becomes important. I want to flip a little bit now to exactly recent time, 2014, and in a sense cross over back to one of the bullet points earlier about the role of media, particularly digital media. And one of the great success stories of the debate around the referendum, whatever the end result of it, was the use of various media forms to effectively debate and to voice and to engage and to critique and so on. Hugely flourishing sort of activity around the terrains of social media, for example, but also the use of websites and so on. Now, we're fairly comfortable with these technologies and sites, but nonetheless, the scale of what happened around the referendum, particularly for creative practitioners and cultural activists, was really, really interesting and really, really important. I'm sure there's about 10 PhDs about to be written on this as we speak, but you know, that's fantastic, is what should happen. And the little quote there, just two little quotes come from just two examples of people who come under this banner, it's probably not showing up so well, of National Collective, Tradfest. So it's Trad for yes, basically, is the kind of hashtag there. And the National Collective is this arts, if you like, body, you know, where people have come together in Scotland to position themselves. And as it says there, we've got Scots, see us, who are the musicers, the makers of song, oh tunes, who are the tellers of stories, the dreamers of dreams, and the shifters and sugglers, it's a great Scottish word, the sugglers. Forever and I, oh the world, you ken what I mean. So the idea of being the artist that is there to sing the songs, to tell stories, but also to shift and to dream, and you know, we had Dream mentioned just earlier, but the sugaling, the sort of shaking away at what's going on there is really important. And then a slightly different comment from a young man who's very much a musician and you know, taking himself into his career and not least his cultural sort of identity and forming that up at kind of exciting times. And as Adam says here, for the past 3 decades, traditional musicians across Scotland have been battling to have our unique musical heritage taken seriously, not just by those who live here, but also by the rest of the world. It seems to me that our self-confidence as a nation is directly affected by how we view our own culture and heritage. We've been waking up to a new respect for our own traditional music, and this has been aiding our overall sense of self-worth. It now looks like we're ready to take the next big step. So a fairly sort of, you know, understandable sort of sense of a young man beginning to see what's there. But there's a whole lot of, you know, underlying issues there about who has been ignoring it, where is the activity being taking place, and how do we think about this sense of history and this sense of culture in Scotland. So I want to turn to this slide here, and I want to just stop a little bit and just revisit again this idea of the role of media. And I mentioned archive earlier. Again, Scotland, and I'm sure a number of people at this conference and event will be much more expert than I am on this, the idea of the collecting tradition in Scotland, of course, is very important and in many ways a success story, and key success stories, School of Scottish Studies and so on. But the sense in which we collect our heritage, our history, is still worth looking at and thinking about. Why do we do it, why do we do it, and what goes on there. And as you see from the quote here from Sinez Romero, they're talking about the digital era, they're talking about the technologies that are all so widely available to us now, and they're talking about the way that the digital offers a virtual space which has no national boundaries and it's not fixed and it doesn't require a validation. And the argument is our new global cultural economy is no longer defined by centre-periphery models. Okay, so maybe. And then notions, reception, mediation, hybridity, cultural identity are no longer functional for understanding virtual migrations, which need to be understood as a complex disjunctive order. So this sense in which we have an understanding of the digital being an opportunity to, if you like, disrupt and to be more fluid and to be more open. Now, it's an attractive prospect, and it would be wrong to suggest it's not the case, that this is an experience that's out there to engage with. And yet, I would argue very strongly that digital media is as much defined by a set of, if you like, structural realities about what can go on and what can't go on as anything pre-digital. So I think we have to be very careful about how the digital technology, if you like, is making available to all, and how that's been, if you like, opportune. And in this other little quick quote, again, just to take you right back in history, this is not new, and we have the sense of history here with a reference to the very famous collector Alexander Carmichael. Again, a number of you may know of him, and he took a huge lifetime really to collect particularly Gaelic oral tradition and ethnology in particularly the Hebrides. And this little quote here comes from a blog site from, it's actually Don William Stewart himself, I think, who's writing it, who really curates the Carmichael Watson project, digital project. And what he says here is quite interesting, because he's making a point to somebody who's written, and he says, "Many thanks for your comment. You're absolutely right that Alexander Carmichael's aspiration to transmit to a new audience," we're talking about somebody in the late 19th century, to a new audience, the traditions which he had gathered and meant that he had often had to adapt and translate them, just as any good contemporary Shawnee would tailor his material for the listening audience. Shawnee, of course, the bard, Gaelic bard. And his testimonies, Carmichael's testimonies to the Napier Commission, which was particularly relating to the land issue in Scotland at the time, are a good case in point. Carmichael's intention was to make both a political and cultural statement about the people of the Highlands. And this is why he included hymns, lullabies, milking songs in his articles, not the usual sort of evidence you'd expect in a parliamentary report. Well, why is that interesting? It's interesting because it's that disruptive opportunity, and it's that capacity for an individual to take their own powerful resources. Carmichael had his own particular power base to do things, and to put at the heart of the debate something new, something fresh, something, if you like, that began to really question and query what had been accepted before. So, if we move to, in a sense, of course, one of the key themes for the conference at large, the idea of the bard, and again, I'm not going to go back in any history on this, I wanted to just bring forward an example of some of the work that's been done. And I'm sure some people may well know this book, and if not, I would urge you, if you're interested in Scotland and the history of the bards, to pick this up. A book by Tim Neate, very much also is supported by John McInnes. And Tim's book is interesting because it's very much a book about the village bards, and about the bards that in some respects have not been so well known outside of a kind of very local referencing. And he talks in the book about the importance of bringing those voices to a public through media, a published book you can buy, you can sit it on your shelves, and you can thumb through. And that sense of bringing the stories alive through books is still important. And I say that because, as we know, there are still issues about the very nature of whether the publishing industry is doing as much as it could about producing, if you like, certain formats for people in certain aspects of what they do. But as Tim says here, the bards he's mentioning are very much ordinary men and women who were very much, if you like, at the sort of everyday level of their activity. As they say here, they lived and fought as frontline troops, not staffroom careerists. They in their lives represent traditions of soldiering, seamanship, service, traditions of religious and intellectual enthusiasm, going back not just to the Reformation, but into prehistory. So these are ordinary men and women who did ordinary jobs and ordinary lives, but had been arguably neglected, and Tim Neate brings them to the fore. And that links us directly through to Hamish. Tim himself knew Hamish very well, did a number of collaborations with Hemachandra. And Hamish is a figure who was many things. He was a poet, he was not least a war poet, he was a writer of songs, but he was also hugely a collector of songs. He was an activist, very involved in political activism around anti weaponry within Scotland in a number of decades, and he was also a great activist for the anti-apartheid movement in Scotland, and that's just not even doing Hamish justice in any sense. But what is most often known about Hamish is particularly this association with song and the collecting of songs in Scotland, Gaelic songs, but also crucially Scots songs as well. And the sense in which Hamish himself, he defined this term, the carrying stream, this idea of bringing the collections together and allowing it to be held in trust, if you like, within archive for next generations to work with, was absolutely immensely important for Scotland, and that's why Hamish Henson remains such a key figure within Scotland and indeed beyond. And as the little quote here says, of the songs I collected and put into circulation, I did this in the context of a definite cultural strategy. And as in a war, and Hamish spent a long time in the war, as in war, one must always allow for the losses of one sort or another. My hope, and it's been realised in quite a large number of cases, has been to encourage young folk to approach the cultural heritage with real creative elan. And the thing, there's so much I could say about Hamish, but I think the important thing here is this idea of this struggle, this sense of strategy, the idea that as important as collecting songs are in the first instance, and that is important, it's the contextualisation of that collection that becomes so crucial and important. So if we flip a little bit over to, I suppose, an idea about media and some discussion around the theory of media, and I only want to just do this here very quickly, I just want to draw your attention to a couple of thinkers on this, and one most certainly has to be, of course, Raymond Williams. And Raymond Williams himself, writing about culture, hugely important figure, but himself actually the importance of history and the idea of the ordinary lives and stories of people was very important to Raymond Williams, and how that was being captured, if you like. Not so much an archivist or anything like that, but very much this wider context of the value of history and bringing it through into contemporary reference. And the transformational potential of your history, the idea that history is transformational. potentially the key thing for individuals. So as it says here, talking on mediation, the necessary processes of composition, whatever it might be, indicates the practical relations between social and artistic forms. But he goes on. But in its more common use, it refers to an indirectness of relation between experience and its composition. And it's that phrase that I find quite interesting, more than quite interesting. It's this slipperiness of the idea of the relationship between the experience and the composition, production, if you like, of the media form, whatever it may be, whether it's a song, whether it's poetry, indeed whether it's visual art and so on, or a television programme, which is something that Williams wrote fairly extensively on, was television. And if we look at Sonia Livingston, who's Professor, I think Westminster actually, but anyway, but Professor of Media, Livingston talks in more contemporary times about the idea of media and in a sense uses this more developed term, mediatization. And just to make the point, following Yarvard's kind of reference here, the role of media in society. So we kind of know this, but let's just look at it. In earlier societies, social institutions like family, school and church were the most important providers of information, tradition and moral orientation for the individual member of society. And today, these traditions have lost some of their former authority, and the media have to some extent taken over their role as providers of information and moral orientation. And at the same time, the media have become society's most important storyteller about society itself. And this capacity for media to set the story, if you like, again, is something worth, I think, paying attention to about how culture is understood and engaged with within our communities and our own lives. So I want to just, conscious of time, and I want to just quickly sort of show you, if it plays, a little clip from Play Me Something, which is a film that was directed by Tim Neat in 1989 and featured a number of people. You may recognise a very young Tilda Swinton, but also John Berger himself was very much involved in the project. I don't know if people have seen Play Me Something. Is it something you've seen? So first of all, we'll see if it works, but it opens, and actually opens with the back end of a cow, so bear with me on that, okay? But it then quickly moves to Barra, the Isle of Barra, and it's really set around the airport lounge in Barra, and it's really a story within a story. It's about the idea of the importance of telling story. So I'm going to just, hopefully, I might fast forward it a bit because we're up with time here. Not quite so fast forward as that, actually.
I'm sorry.
So let me see if I can get this too.
There's something in Glasgow. The plane hasn't taken off yet, so it'll be at least an hour.
It is not just an hour. It's a lot beginning at 8. The tide of seats are that.
Sorry, it's
We haven't covered the
Where's the balls?
Oh,
Oh, look everyone, it'll be all right. Just
Linda, come in here.
comfortable. There's coke in the fridge. Are these sheepskins
Sorry.
for sale?
what's up with this Kelly Janet you're working with?
There's no picture.
Isn't that a bad idea?
Not really, just a friend like guns.
The Isle is full of noise.
Somebody should tell how he minds the front end. Oh, that's the bird watcher. He wants to film his main language. He's an Italian. He's been here for ages. I think he thinks it's fun.
Nothing works, eh? Okay. Thank you. That's great. Sorry, this had to run off a different programme.
These sheepskins are very soft. Do they
still doing it.
sheepskins? Oh,
We've
absolutely.
got 2 on that.
Scottish blackface sheepskins, Jacob sheepskin.
3 actually. Just for safety. Okay. So this is a modernist film. What have you? This is a modernist film that plays around with the ideas how you tell stories, as you would expect from John Berger, but also Tim Neat. And I want to show it to you because I want you to just get a sense of why in 1989 this film, which went on to win the European prize, Europa Prize for film, but was utterly ignored largely within the UK. Less ignored in Scotland, but it was very much ignored within the rest of the UK. And I just want to play you a little bit and give you a flavour because Hamish Henderson is the man you see with a hat coming in with the television, and Hamish was very much involved in this positioning of Gaelic song and tradition and story in a wider, if you like, global world. But I'll let you just watch a little bit of it and you'll get the
Going back tomorrow?
No, thank God. Starting a job on Monday, on the mainland.
What line's that then?
Hairdressing. What are you going for?
Going to get some new brake linings for my bike. Going to see Celtic play Hearts.
Football. So you have a bike then?
Honda VF750.
The island big enough for a bike like that?
Done 20,000 miles. Can't hear or out down if I think too much.
Don't you think we don't know what you're saying now?
Qualche cosa, un film di Timothy Mead e John Burton. Play me something, a film by...
This is Amanda Townsley at Flight Check. Reports are coming in of thick fog at Glasgow Airport. All travellers, somebody here now.
Delays are inevitable. God, we can never do without them.
72546789110.
Oh, look, it's the Tenny man.
It cut a nice show, did you?
If we see that again,
Three Cali lad talks like some. Any decent Celtic person got a band these days.
hello, Cyrus. Nice to see you, dear.
Hello, Alison. Got yourself a bit wet, did you?
Let's get that door shut. Well now, everyone, I'm sorry. There's something in Glasgow. The plane hasn't taken off yet, so it'll be at least an hour.
It's not an hour. It's a lot being an 8. The title seats are that.
We know this is an island. We haven't got the underground, surely.
Bugger this, Janet. I'm off.
Oh, look, everyone, it'll be all right. Just make yourself comfortable. There's coke in the fridge. Are these sheepskins for sale?
What's up with this telly, Janet, you want to mention?
There's no picture.
Sound?
Not really, just a sound like gulls.
The isle is full of mud.
Somebody should tell that wee man to come in. Oh, that's the bird watcher. He wants to film the mainland week. He's an Italian. He's been here for ages. I think he thinks it's fun. These sheepskins are very soft. Are they genuine sheepskins? Oh, absolutely. Scottish black-faced sheepskins, Jacob's sheepskins, soy sheepskins. What kind of sheepskin were you looking for? Just a white sheepskin. £30. I've always wondered what one would actually do with a sheepskin. Oh, whatever you fancy.
Whisper your heart. Any chance you get that line going?
Right.
Boys, root back on the call.
Let's get these cheers harder, right? Take a look at these teeth. Ah, they look much better. This will be your last visit, I suppose. I'd rather have a wave than a toothed out entity. Yeah, tour. They look fine now, anyway.
So many stories. So many stories here. Each one waiting to be chosen. And any story is like an open ticket across the sea to any place in the world where it happened. Now, to Belfast, or to Glasgow, your Glasgow, or to Valparaiso, or Vancouver. Huh? No. To Mestre.
Addio! What is it that men have and women don't?
Okay, I'm going to stop it there because I'm conscious of time. What you saw there, and it's an interesting film just obviously in terms of how it's even composed and put together, and Tim, as I say, worked very closely with John Berger, so there's a very particular style to it, and it's slow when the pace is slow and you get students to start to watch it and like that stuff in the first 5 minutes. But actually, of course, John Berger's character, as you can see, is a very powerful presence. And what proceeds to happen is he then tells a story it's on YouTube, you can actually, I would encourage you to have a look at it. And he tells a story about a man who comes down from the mountains of Italy to spend some time in Venice for a day and a night, and he meets a woman and effectively the day unfolds from that. But it's also, crucially, also about politics, and it's about the role of Gramsci and the role of cultural tradition in politics. So let me move on a little bit, because as Berger said in the film, it's about stories, and it's about the ways of telling stories. And Tim's film, now very much seen by any number of people as such in a way a masterpiece of its form and what it was doing there, involving Hamish, involving a figure like John Berger, John Moore's photographs and so on, and taking us from Barra to Venice and internationally connecting us up with issues of class and gender and work and labour and all sorts of different things. And that sense of telling stories from a local point of view is really part and parcel of kind of what I wanted to just explore this morning, and the role of media within that. So Hamish, key figure in that, and others of course as well. And another crucially important figure is Sorley MacLean. Sam, as he was known of course to the people that he worked beside in his own family, but Sorley is the persona. Sorley MacLean, Song Gaelian. And Sorley I knew as a child. My dad worked with him in Plockton in the school. My dad was a teacher then, so I knew him, I knew the family, but I was a child, I was younger then, and didn't really know him in my older years. But the sense of bringing just this on to the second part really of this, and taking you a little bit around the role of Sorley in terms of how we think about mediating Scottish identity and culture. One of the first things again I want to revisit is that Sorley himself as a figure has to some extent been appropriated by certain, if you like, forces in certain forms. Now, Sorley, first and foremost, a poet, and an immense, hugely influential poet, and I hope to show you a clip about Sorley in a bit more detail from one of the films. And I think the thing here, though, is as the quote says here from himself, his own understanding of his identity and his creative position, if you like, was very much one grounded wholly in politics and critical kind of referencing. And as it says here, at the age of 12, I took to the gospel of socialism. We basically gave up the free church. And I believe that in my later teens, a dichotomy took me psychologically. My pure aesthetic idols of old Gaelic songs, and my humano-aesthetic idols of Blake and Shelley. And in Sorley's poetry, of course, hugely powerful. The lyric is key. Whole raft of different influences and phases to Sorley's poetry, from the love poems to the war poems and so on. But at the end of the day, this sense of if you like, a critical political context for Sorley MacLean is really what I wanted to just flag today. And as I said, we ran an event through the Island Centre in collaboration with Solomon Rostig, the Gaelic College in Skye, again I'm sure a number of people will know of, and it was a really fantastic event. It was about a week-long event, and we brought together creative practitioners, singers, artists, poets and so on, musicians, and we brought together academics who were also singers, artists and poets and musicians, and we brought them together for a week of celebration, a centenary of 100 years of Sorley's birth in 2011. And that event was really interesting because it flagged up a whole set of, if you like, revisitings to the idea of what Sorley's work was for Scotland and what it represented, not least in an international context. And Sorley himself had been hugely influenced as a child and as a young man with his own cultural heritage of Gaelic oral tradition, not least the women in his life, and the idea of Gaelic song. And he didn't sing himself and so on, but he was very much aware of his own roots, his own heritage, and the injustices, if you like, of course, that many of you will know well, that have been meted out to the Gaelic culture. But he was also, and this is the important point, and I've not got time this morning, never mind just where we are now with time to go into this in great detail, but he was also crucially a voice that really began to challenge some of the norms and the expectations about how Gaelic and Gaelic culture, if you like, was being positioned and being understood in Scotland. He was, of course, very key in developing an education sort of agenda around Gaelic in schools, for example, which he was to a large extent very successful to a point. But there are still issues about how Gaelic, for example, is placed within schools, and indeed Scots for that matter. What this little slide here, I'm not going to play the clip, this slide here is actually my dad speaking about his own relationship to Sorley and indeed to Hamish, both of who he knew well. And as it says here, really just to give you a quick snapshot of some of this context, the links of Sorley MacLean to Hamish Henderson and to Hugh McDermott are key, and the wider context for each of them of an international socialism and a political sort of situation on the left is important. It's important for Scotland because it underpins so much of the creative flow and the energy, not about agreeing, but about debating, about critiquing, about what Scotland's identity and political position is in terms of cultural form. And MacLean himself, hugely motivated both externally to a wider set of forces, not least his own experiences with the war, but also, crucially internally, his relationship to his own class, his own people, the role in which the Gael themselves had operated to, in many, many ways, complicitly position Gaelic and Gaelic culture in ways that were an absolute anathema to Sorley's own reckoning. So, you know, that there's a whole backstory in this, and as I say, I'm going to show you a clip from a film, and there's a link that you can follow through to see that film in full, and again, a number of people I'm sure have followed up on Sorley's work. But key again is this role of a figure like Gramsci, the capacity for Antonio Gramsci's political thinking to come through into Scotland and to link up with people working and writing and making music and song and poetry in Scotland, and questioning the issue of authority and who holds, if you like, the position of authority and what is culture, what is, if you like, the correct culture, the valued culture, and if you like, how that was being played out across the institutions of Scotland, not least the media. And Hamish Henderson was key to positioning the Gaelic history itself as part of a wider struggle of international significance, as was Sorley. Now, this individual here is Douglas Gifford, Scottish Professor of Literature, Professor of Scottish Literature at University of Glasgow, and Douglas well recognised for his own profile on literature, particularly on poetry, but also Scottish literature. And he writes a little bit about, so he talks a little bit about the role of Gaelic culture and the divide. And again, how am I doing for time actually?
20 minutes.
Okay, let me just play you this because I think it's quite useful. It's only a short clip here. These were recorded interviews from the actual event that we did in Skye at Solomore. And Douglas is not a Gael. Douglas doesn't have Gaelic, but as I say, very expert, huge figure in terms of the academic terrain of Scottish culture and literature. And we asked him to come and speak about Sorley's role, from his perspective, if you like, from a national position of Scottish culture and literature at large. And I'll let you just listen a little bit to Douglas.
Douglas, you come at this from the perspective of a long practicing academic in Scottish literature in the national dimension. This has been about a Gaelic poet in the National Gaelic College. How do you think it's handled, the whole business of placing Sorley in the national context of Scotland, Scottish literature and Scottish culture?
When I was asked to come and do this, I was very concerned about it because, well, let me put it another way. I spent more time thinking about this than I have for 45 years of doing talks and talking to people and conferences and such like. And the reason for that was that within Scotland there is the divide between Lowland Scots and Standard English together, and on the other hand, up here the fact of a culture that has had to struggle to keep itself going and to make it, to perpetuate its own voice. The other aspect of that is if you're from the Lowlands and you've over-concentrated, and I admit that, I've edited books in Scottish literature, history of Scottish women's writing, and I still have certain guilts about not having been thorough enough to include Gaelic women poets, Gaelic writers, so that coming up here, you feel not so much you're entering the lion's den or entering the terrible mouth of the gale, but that what you're doing is intruding on somebody's territory with a sense of guilt. Now, what's been lovely about this conference is that has not transpired. What it has given to me is the sense that
Effectively what Douglas just finishes off by saying is that he, in a nutshell, captures what has been a rather thorny, tense debate, not altogether a public debate, which is the worst kind, of tensions between the authorial voice, if you like, of Scottish culture, and what is the epic culture of Scotland, and what is the tradition of Scotland, and what is, if you like, to the fore there. And what Douglas is really alluding to is the fact that within the conference there, and it was very much our hope, and it was lovely to have him speak of this, that would begin to dissolve, because Scotland couldn't afford this. We can't afford this. No nation can afford that unhealthy tension of competing terrains, of who's the best, if you like, which is really what it largely boils down to. And rather what it's about is the synergy, it's about the connection, it's about the engagement with each other. So Douglas's comment, if you like, gives you just a little bit of a flavour. He talks, as I say, about the reconciliation, if you like, on both sides. Now, what I want to do before we finish is I want to show you a clip of Sorley MacLean in the film Halig, which again, maybe perhaps people have seen, but I want to give you a flavour of that because it just brings to a close, really, a sense of Sorley, which you haven't really seen yet. But before I do that, just a couple more slides. This, again, I think because of time, I'm not maybe going to be able to do this, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about it. This is Dr. John Purser, a wonderful man, a fantastically wonderful, generous man, and he lives in Skye, and he works and connects up with Song Moore as well as a number of other things. And John, very much deeply engaged with musicology, and he came and gave us a talk. I asked him to give a talk on the music of the bards. And what he talks about here is really the sense of Sorley's own capacity in delivery of his own poems to effectively to deliver them as sung. But Sorley was never a singer, he would never see himself as a singer. But it's this wider idea of the singing, or the sung aspect of one's story, one's poetry, and I think that's a really rich idea. And he also talks about the importance of Gaelic and the backdrop of Gaelic oral tradition, of course, but crucially also landscape. That Sorley MacLean very much rooted in landscape. And we'll see a clip later on from the film that will reconfirm that. And the little quote there in blue is one that comes direct from Sorley, a recording of another archive recording he held elsewhere, where Sorley MacLean himself talks about how it is in his own delivery to, as it were, speak his own poetry. And he talks about his capacity to think, well, he talks about his own sense of giving his poetry and recitation as a tight rope to cross the abyss of silence. And it's just a lovely sort of little phrasing of the sense of kind of the tension of delivery, the deep value, the deep grip that you have to have and you embody in terms of connecting back to that oral tradition and that huge important sort of legacy that MacLean's work represents and he so powerfully engages with. So we are at the clip now, and I want to turn to the DVD and just show you a wee clip off that, and I'm very conscious that I'm kind of showing you just bits and pieces of this. But before I show you the clip proper, and it runs for about 10 minutes or so, and you'll see Seamus Heaney, for example, speaking in it, and so on. I just want to kind of finish up with the PowerPoint rather than flipping back and forward with it, and just kind of draw this a little bit to a close. The film, as I say, is here, Halleck, the Poetry and Landscape of Solly McLean, and I'll show you a clip, as I say, in a second, again directed by Tim. But the little kind of quote that's there is something I just wanted to kind of pull this to a close with. Hamish, Sorley, a number of other individuals, people like yourselves who are very much poets and songmakers and musicians, absolutely, it's the performativity of that culture that is so important and crucial, and yet that performativity is wholly embedded in the physicality, the literal body of individuals, and of course the landscape and the environment from which people every day live and engage with and come. And that's no more so true than Sorley McLean. But it was also true for Hamish Henderson, who lived and breathed kind of the hedgerows and the back stairs of cities of Scotland. Hamish had that real connectivity to the everydayness of the world. And this little quote here, I think, just brings us to kind of conclusion about when we look at media, we look at the representation of figures like the poets and storytellers such as these. What can we think about, and what can we think about in terms of what's worth revisiting? And the idea then of the concept of the vernacular, the everyday if you like, helps us to think about processes of borrowing and remaking by which social practices become established as social institutions with or without the cultural authority of tradition. And again, we're back to that sense that Williams talks about that indirectness, that fluidity about what we're doing here, what's the authority of this tradition and how it's represented. Practices which, whatever their form, have social power and a degree of stability as long as they serve a useful purpose in people's lives. Well, what's a useful purpose in people's lives? From this perspective, tradition is an emerging property of cultural practice rather than its foundation. And that last statement about this idea of tradition being process rather than being fixed, which again I totally appreciate any number of people here will go with that idea, but nonetheless there are others out there who are not, I think is really important. So going back to a film from 1989 and 84 and archive recordings way back in time have huge value, and they have huge value to continue to bring forward to the contemporary and to revisit and so on. So I want to just close this down, and hopefully the young boy on an Eriskay beach, and he's a lot bigger now, but let me just see if hopefully this will run. So this, I'll just run this for 10 minutes. That's it. How we do for time?
Yeah, that'll be just about this one.
Great, that's perfect. So I was going to show another couple, but we'll do the 10-minute one, whatever. So this is Halleck, as I say, directed by Tim. The quality of the print, I'm sorry, is not great. It's the technology of the time that tells its own story. But if you can, bear with it. It's a poetic piece. In many respects, but it also has, particularly the clip you'll see, both Sorley himself speaking, but also Seamus Heaney speaking, who was again a huge admirer of Sorley McLean and vice versa, and Seamus visited Sorley and they connected up on a number of occasions. Halleck, for those of you who don't know, is the name of a township that was cleared in the clearances in Scotland, a township that sits on the east coast of the Isle of Rassay. And the Isle of Rassay is Sorley's island. It's the island he very much knew and claimed his home and grew up in. And he writes of Halleck in many important, crucial ways. And in fact, the clip I can't show you really is the poem on Halleck, but I'm going to leave that as the taster for you to go and look that up in your own time. But let me just show you the clip to close. And you'll hear the sungness of Sorley's voice.
Waar is met briesje, ik besmoor aan jourstes te wal. Zie aan je hoorn toch ik aan maar een smiele schaal. Vala her klattig de tripleit, bleef wonen een stjoere vrouw. De spoorlijnd houden van briesje, waar me gassen is so explore. Camera nach the barrier roared, but we on agus a hail me a coe, si tra bonir on your broad.
Scottish Gaelic poet Solomon Cring was born on the Hebridean island of Rasay on October 26, 1911. Hallaig is a place on the east side of the island. During the 18th and 19th centuries, Hallaig supported a township of about a dozen families. In 1853, the township was cleared of its inhabitants and the land given over to commercial sheep farming. North of Hallaig lies Scripple, another derelict township. Today, both look out over the torpedo testing grounds of the Royal Navy.
Scrape-Bittle in the morning, facing Applecross on the sun. Scrape-Bittle that is so beautiful, quite as beautiful as Hallaig. No words can be put on beauty, no picture, music or poem made for it. Scrape-Bittle the sheep pen and the cattle fold, with walls to the south and west and north, and to the east the sea sound over to the sanctuary of Mulgrua. There is a half-dead memory of Mulgrua, but only the dead written names of the children, men and women, whom Rainey put off the land between the north end of the rock and the castle built for MacSwan or for Machgayachallam, for violence and refuge. A steep brae with scree cairns to the east down from the end of the rock, under birch, rowan and alder, and the church of falsehood in high water. The springtide is at its height. It was not its lies that betrayed the people in the time of the great pietist Rainey, who cleared 14 townships in the island of the big men, great Rasay of the MacLeods. Rainey left Scrape-Bittle without people, with no houses or cattle, only sheep. But he left Scrape-Bittle beautiful. In his time, he could do nothing else. A seal would lift its head and a basking shark its sail, but today in the sea sound a submarine lifts its turret and its black, sleek back, threatening the thing that would make dross of wood, of meadows and of rocks, that would leave Scrape-Bittle without beauty, just as it was left without people. The big house of Clachan and the debts that had brought on Machgayachallam heavy on the tenantry of every township, and godly Rainey, though he was not in debt, as a social climbing put a burden on James Machgayachallam and brought exile on his son, with the largeness and the beauty that they added to the big house. A little remnant of its people in the island of the big men, and the black turrets and the sound between Scrape-Bittle and the sanctuary, mopping the flagstone of Mulgrua, and the giant's cave in Rona with its little rows of stones, seats of men and women and children, listening to Mr. Ruari telling that here is no abiding city, rainy or no rainy. Laughter and weeping, love merriment and suffering, anger, hatred and spite, heroism, cowardice and heartbreak, and times of gentle happiness have left Scraperdown, just as they left Brothel Castle, before they left the crofters of Scraperdown and of Ferns and Helling, and of every township of the port deemed desolate for Ramie's money and Mackenzie's. There are other towers from the sound, mocking the tower that fell from the top of the castle rock, towers worse than every tower that violence raised in the world, the periscopes and sleek black sides of the ships of the death that killed the thousands of Nagasaki, the death of the great heat and the smoke, the death that would bring utter devastation even on the beauty that grew in Scraperdown and is still there in spite of Ramie's bad deed, his greed and social pride. But the submarines and the aeroplanes and the atom and neutron, the slow sword poverty is not their gift, but a sudden holocaust that will fall from the sky and will rise from every brae and will cling to every beautiful meadow between the north end of the rock and the pine wood, between Scraperdown and the castle.
I first heard Charlie MacLean speaking his poems in Gaelic on the stage of the Abbey Theatre here in Dublin, and that experience had the force of a revelation. MacLean's one of those writers whose actual physical voice adds a dimension to the written poem. The voice that I heard was heightened and mesmeric and weathered, and seemed to come in close from far away, rather like the drone of a pipe. And the performance had a terrific bardic dignity about it. It was a surrender of himself, a surrender to the otherness of the poem, and indeed to the resonances of the Gaelic language itself. Something that the Polish poet Stanislaw Bardic said about his compatriot Milosz applies with equal force to the achievement of Charlie MacLean. A poet can be great only when he is truly himself and faithful to the horizon of circumstance that encircles him. But this loyalty to a world of circumstance is a barrier to a reader who has grown up in a different native realm. Charlie MacLean's native realm is the northwest Highlands of Scotland. His language is the Gaelic language spoken by, say, 100,000 people. What he writes about are particular places, particular women, particular historical circumstances, particular political causes. So he is deeply, authentically and proudly a local poet, a poet of place. But he is also a major poet of the 20th century, and his work, even in translation, comes through with tremendous passion and with a sense of revelation.
Okay, I'll stop it there. Okay, so that's just a clip of it. I'd urge, if you've not seen Halig, if you ever get a chance to watch it through, please do so. It used to be online, but it doesn't seem to be on there as it used to be, but it's well worth having a look at it. So thank you very much for your time, thanks for your patience, thanks for listening, thanks for the technological help, thanks for Linda for helping, and I'm delighted to talk to anybody if you have any questions later. Thanks very much indeed.